Hello, my name is Hakon and welcome back to another little tutorial on the Empress Effects Zoia patchable modular digital synthesizer in a lovely little stomp box. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about something that you may or may not have thought about when you've been using the Zoia, especially with sequencers. Now, when you have a sequencer running like I do now, I'll just switch that on for you. Now what this does, I'll just explain quickly how my patch is set up here. This is just a very basic synthesizer voice. Up here I've got an oscillator. It is a triangle wave oscillator. The output of the oscillator goes into a VCA. The VCA is controlled by an ADSR envelope here. So that controls the volume of the amplification. The output of the VCA goes into an audio output. That is the sound you hear now. The ADSR is triggered by an LFO, and that is also the same LFO that triggers the sequencer. So for every step of the sequencer now, the ADSR is triggered, the VCA gets amplification value, and you can hear the sound. Now, the problem with this potentially is that a zero value in a sequencer is actually not a zero. As you can hear, it's still making a sound. A zero value on an oscillator is not a zero, it's still making a note value. What if you sometimes would want zero to actually mean off, no sound at all? And there is an easy way to do this, as there often is with the Zoia, once you figure out how to do it. And I'll show you one method now that can be used to make one of the note values. It doesn't have to be the A0, of course, but that is easier, and it makes sense because it is a zero CV value within the Zoia to make that a note off rather than a zero. Of course, then the lowest note that you can play would be an A0 sharp. You could also do this the other way around and make a value of 1 be off, but I think 0 makes a lot of sense, and most of the time you wouldn't need a note value of a 0 in your music. It's quite a low note. In fact, in many speakers it wouldn't even sound at all, and depending on what you're listening to on right now, you may or may not hear the sound that's going now. I'll actually, just to show you, I'll transpose everything in the oscillator itself now, and you can hear. So the value that comes from the sequencer is still a 0, but it turns into a note value regardless. Okay, I shall just keep it up here because it'll be easier to hear what I'm doing next. Okay, so how can we go about this? Now what we want to do is to make the Zoia interpret a 0 coming from the sequencer as an off stage. And of course, what I have done before when I have made sequencer patches on the Zoia and when I've demonstrated it in videos is I've controlled the gate of the sequencer, which notes should be on or off, by which of these notes send the gate signal to the ADSR envelope. And of course, this can be used in many contexts as the way that you control when a note is off and when it is on. But that doesn't always work. And of course, if you are using a sequencer with external gear, then using an ADSR envelope within the Zoia will not make much of a difference. You are supposed to control the values going out and the gate going out, of course, from the Zoia. But that's a slightly different thing again. But it's just one of the scenarios where you would have to think differently about how you control when a note is on and when there is no sound at all. Okay, so the method I've chosen as what I think is the easiest way to achieve this within the Zoia is to use a switch as the main way to control when the sound is on or off. So I'm going to go into audio modules and select audio in switch with 2 inputs. Okay. So what an audio switch does, or any switch does, is it takes an in switch takes a certain number of channels of inputs. In this case, I chose 2, so it's got an input 1 and an input 2. Then it has a channel selector, which selects which of these input channels is the only one that is sent to the single output channel. An out switch works the other way around. You have a single input and a channel selector which selects between the different outputs, and only one of the outputs gets a signal. You will see me using it in most of my videos because it's such a useful module. There are 2 different kinds of switch modules. There's an audio switch and there's a CV switch. And of course, in this case, I'm actually switching with an audio signal rather than the CV control value signal, which is why I'm choosing an audio switch, which is under audio modules rather than control modules. Right. So the idea is that when the note value in the sequencer is 0, when the CV output of the sequencer is 0, we want this switch to not pass through any audio. And where the audio comes from, I will take it from the oscillator, I think. I could have taken it at the end of the VCA, but I think it makes sense to do it at the source. So I will remove this patch between the oscillator and the VCA, like so. And I will patch up the oscillator now to not to channel 1 on the switch, but to channel 2. I want channel 1 to be the off stage. So now the switch would only let through audio if the channel selector tells it that channel 2 is active. And then I want the output of the switch to go to the VCA. So I'm just doing a little detour via the switch. So how do I make this channel selector select channel 2 when I want it to pass through audio and channel 1 when I don't? I want channel 1 to be selected when the output from the sequencer is 0, and for any other output I wanted to select channel 2. And to do that, I will make a control module called a comparator. What a comparator does is it has 2 inputs. They're called the positive input and the negative input. If the value that is in the positive input is equal to or greater than the value in the negative input, it will output a value of 1. Right now, both are set to 0, and so it outputs a value of 1. And I want this to decide whether a note value from the sequencer is higher than an A0, so higher than 0. So the way I do this is I take the CV value from the sequencer, the same that is sent to the oscillator now, and I'll take that into the positive input of the comparator. And I want it to give this comparator to send an output of 1 when the input value here on the positive input is greater than 0. That is anything but an A0 exactly on the sequencer. So I set the negative input manually to 0.0001. Now, this output here will only show 1 if the note value here is greater than A0. I'll just move one of these up to A sharp now, and you can see the output should go up to 1 when you have an A0 sharp coming out. Now, this value of 1 can be sent to the channel selector over here, and a value of 1 will always select the last channel, And of course, in this case, we only have 2 channels, which, and of course, the way a channel selector works is that it takes the number of channels, it takes the value of 1 and divides it by the number of channels, and that is how it selects the different channels. If you have 2 channels, the first one is selected when the channel selector gets an input of 0 to 0.5, and channel 2 is selected when you get 0.5 to 1. And so for 2 channels, I would just use 0 and 1. It could be anything in between as well. So now we do get an output here. I'll just switch it on again now. So now the sound is off when the sequencer shows an A0, but when it shows anything else, it will send an output. A little sort of blip there as well. I'm sure I could tidy that up in some way, but the principle is the important thing right now. This is one way you can control whether the audio is actually sent out or not. And of course, this would sound much nicer if I had an effect or something as well. So I reduce the attack a lot, I get a more pronounced click there, but I don't mind the click actually. Because with a slow attack, the click disappears. So that's the principle of it. You, in order to, or one method of making sure that the notes aren't always on is to take the output of the oscillator and run it into a switch that is only sensed through the audio signal if the value, the note input value that you send to the oscillator, from the sequencer in this case, is greater than 0. So I hope you found that useful and clear. If you have any questions, of course, please feel free to leave them in the comments and I will try to answer them. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, subscribe, all those usual things. There will be more Zoia videos coming up. I still have more ideas for things I want to do and therefore things that I will show on the Zoia. As usual, this was just one of those ideas I had for something I wanted to do for myself, and I wanted to figure out how to do it. And I will bring you more videos about that in the future as well. I have several other ideas at the moment, and I'm working on those as and when I have the time. So, thanks for watching, and goodbye for now. Bye-bye.